will now start. So having that said, the idea of today, if we take one step back, at least from our perspective, is our mission is to make education more accessible and personal for everyone. And what we would really want to do is to sort of bring together all those wonderful efforts that are happening at different organizations and to see if we can actually connect that and sort of build on top of each other's work. So that's, of course, the thing that we try to do with the software that we built. But I think it's also really important to bring people into contact. And that's at least one of the things that we hope to achieve today. So that really means this is about you and bringing your experiences together. And there are already quite some experience because your students have already answered over 25 million questions. And it's now a real host of organizations that are using Grasple, that are using Grasple within their organization, but also sometimes between organizations. And we'll hear about that today. This is the program, roughly. So in about 5 minutes, we'll hear from Pim and Stefan. Later on, we'll hear from Annie from the University of Twente, then from Iris from Radboud University. In between, there will be ample of time for questions and answers. And then at the end, we'll go into some of the testing a little bit more and hear from Ilse from TU Delft. At the end, we'll share some sort of latest product updates, and then we'll sort of round it up again. But before we dive in, I will give a brief introduction. We'll take probably 5 minutes, and then we'll move to Pim Stuurman and Stefan. But before we do that, I'm very interested to hear sort of all of you. And of course, I think I know most of you. But for the people here, it would be probably interesting to see sort of who is here. So it would be great if you could just briefly introduce yourself in the chat. And by doing sort of stating your name, where you work, maybe what kind of thing you're excited about. It can be about Grasple, can also just be about education in general, so that people maybe understand a little bit what's on top of your mind. And the last thing, it's optional, but it would be interesting to hear sort of what is something you're actually struggling with. Because then we can actually maybe during this meeting or also after, see if we can sometimes maybe bring people into contact, because you may have things that you're both struggling with, or actually maybe you're struggling with something that we know somebody else has done a lot of interesting work on. So let's say 2 minutes to see who's here. Okay, I see the first chats coming in. Great to see. So I see we have people from the Vrije Universiteit, from Utrecht, from Rotterdam, from the University of Twente, another one from Radboud, from Delft, from Grasple. Of course, we have people from Twente, more people from Twente, from Delft, from Utrecht. So it's great to see people from so many different organizations. People are interested to see what kind of questions other people have. Intelligent feedback, very interesting as well, of course. The best way to ask questions to students. Decision trees, also interesting. How we can make courses more interactive. Wonderful. Hey, so great. And the reason that I wanted you to do this in the chat is also so you can see what other people are working on and what kind of things they're exciting about, what things they're struggling with. So thank you. Do use that chat. If you have questions in between, we have scheduled question and answer time. But if you have questions during a presentation, just put them in the chat, and then Ellen can also call them out during the question and answers, and then we sort of give you the mic, and then pay attention to the question that you want to answer. Now, I wanted to start. I already have been talking, but I will continue this for a couple of more minutes because we have shared a presentation at the OE Global Conference. That was last week. It was a very big conference the whole week from countries all around the world. I think there were over, well, maybe 200 presentations. And this was one of them. And I wanted to share this because I think it was hopefully at least, sort of a very brief introduction to some things that are happening at your universities. Now, it's not all the universities that are here, but we just selected a couple of them and then tried to sort of visualize also the ways that people are working together at those organizations. And what we saw were sort of 7 patterns in how people actually curate and collaborate on resources. So let's see if these patterns are sort of useful and maybe recognizable for you. So let's see. Of course, you know what Grasple is, but the Open Education Consortium, so that's the one that organized the conference, is also one that we received an award for all of the resources that we curated. And that's also, I think, an award for a lot of you, because it's also been in collaboration with you. So again, thanks and congratulations. We also worked on a workshop there for an open format for interactive math exercises. So that means that we can actually share exercises between different platforms. And the reason I call this out here is this is still open. We will put it in the email after this meeting. But we're still very interested to sort of hear your contributions and feedback on this. So the idea is that we can actually create questions in Grasple, but then also share them in different platforms, or the other way around. So do know that it's open and that we're very interested to hear your contributions. And these are the 7 patterns that we identified. And I can imagine they're very sort of symbolic. But the idea is that being aware of these patterns may help actually share best practice and sort of understand the ways in people are collaborating. And the clarification of the symbols is the square is an organization, the circle an instructor, the green circle is student, the hexagon, well, it's not a hexagon, well, the other shape, odd shape, is the supporting staff or team, and then arrows are sharing or reusing materials. And then what we saw, pentagon, thank you. And then the first type of pattern that we saw is when people start sharing resources, is sort of informal sharing. So you maybe know colleagues at different universities and people say, hey, can I maybe use a little bit of your material? And that's often what we see. And that's also what we try to do as Grasple, to then bring you together. Then at Utrecht University, we see a different kind of sharing. And I think there we see an internal community of practice, because it's all members who are creating and sharing materials. Of course, there is coordination, but I think a lot of people are involved there. And then at the TU Delft, we see a similar but sort of different thing. because there they have the Prime team who work on a lot of exercise, or at least coordinate this, because it's a lot of teachers who create exercises, for example, linear algebra exercises that they also shared openly. And now also very interesting videos with follow-up questions in Grasple. At least the idea that we have, what Prime is doing there, is it's sort of functioning as an in-house open educational resources publisher almost, because they're actually taking in a lot of those exercises, they're curating them, reviewing them, or at least coordinating that process, so that all the other teachers can also use that collection of materials. We think that is a really interesting one, because there you make it a lot easier for other teachers to use materials that have already been curated. Now at the University of Twente, who will also talk in a bit, we see a different version of this, because this is, I think, one where we as Grasple have been asked to actually sort of take that role, at least to start, because Twente switched from commercial publishers to open educational resources. Now together with Twente, we're working on creating a large collection of exercises for them. And Pim Stuurman and Stefan will talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And then another interesting thing to see is when things become more formalized sharing. And this is happening with Share Stats. So these are departments from 4 universities working together to create one public repository of statistics exercises. So it's people from Erasmus, from Utrecht, from Amsterdam, and from the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam. Sort of there we see a lot of communities internally that are collaborating formally on really one a big repository of materials, and then publishing that supported by government funds. It's really interesting to see sort of a formalized community of practice. And then the final two, so I'm coming to an end here, is where actually students become more involved in the curating and creation of exercises. So one that we saw, I haven't seen this happening in Grasple, but I did see this in medical universities, where it was students that would filter a lot of open educational resources and then sort of get one curated selection and actually sort of present that to teachers, who would then sort of do the final check, so that it's the instructors that only have to check materials that sort of conform to basic quality, and that selection was then done by student assistants. And I think it was an interesting one where you could actually use the work of the students assistants, and then the limited time of the instructors to only really check the ones that conform to basic quality. And then the final example that we saw is happening here at the Hogeschool of Amsterdam. It is an interesting one, I think, where it's students that create questions. So these are students that will become math teachers, and their sort of homework or their challenge is to create exercises that will help others to assess themselves. And then they curate it, they peer review it, and then the best ones can then later on be sort of reused as actually practice material. So this is a really interesting one. It's a pilot that is now going on, so I don't know the results yet, but I thought it was interesting to highlight this as things that are going on. And so the idea, hopefully, is that by seeing all of these different things and by seeing these different types of how you can collaborate, is that it works to get collaboration going on within an organization. And then what hopefully will then happen is that these organizations will also collaborate between, so that we actually can build on top of each other's work, which is, of course, the thing that we're all very excited about. So hopefully that functioned as a sort of a brief intro into all of the beautiful things that are happening in your organizations. But you know it way better than I do, so it's also you who I will give the word for now. And as an intro to that, I would like to give the word to Pim Stuurman and to Stefan Postuma. And I think Pim Stuurman will start by telling a little bit on what we're now working on in collaboration with the University of Twente in curating and creating math exercises based on existing open resources. So with that, I will stop sharing, or no, I will keep sharing this, and Pim Stuurman will talk.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Pim Bellinga. So as you notice, my name is also Pim, which can be a little bit confusing. So I typically go by Pim S, not to be confused with Pim B, who just spoke. So quick intro, I work mainly on the content side within Grasple. I have a background in applied mathematics at TU Delft. And I'm currently mainly focused on the sort of onboarding process of University of Twente. So getting them into Grasple and then specifically seeing what kind of content we already have available and what type of content we need to create additionally. So I will speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, mainly focusing on the practical side of this and sort of showing how open education resources and previous work done by TU Delft can help in this. And then after that, Stefan will continue with a more broad level look on how University of Twente is approaching this. So very practically, in this first year, University of Twente wants to do 11 courses in mathematics, mainly in the bachelor program, covering topics like calculus, linear algebra, and vector calculus, which is something that is quite similar to what I've done as an onboarding process for TU Delft as well a couple of years ago. So what we basically wanted to do there is first see how much content we already had available based on what we've done before with TU Delft and other universities. So this process kind of works very simply in that at the start, the teachers of all these 11 courses sort of give us an overview of what type of material they need, usually based on their course materials and books and so on. Then we go through our existing content and sort of establish what we already have, and I sort of send them this collection for these teachers to review. And then really the fun part starts, is where these teachers start to look at their specific courses and what they actually need, and we identify what sort of material is still missing. And this can be quite tricky because even though we've already done a lot of open resources in Grasple, there are always these very nuanced things with math courses. So for example, one thing you might run into is that we have an entire collection of exercises that cover indefinite integrals, but perhaps your course covers integrals before it covers stuff like cosines and sines or other transcendental functions. And so we have to take those out or find replacements for them for your course. And there are sort of many cases where a different use of notation or a different order in how the course is presented actually means that you might need some more different exercises to cover the ones that you can't use. So basically the teacher receives this entire overview of what we have. They then provide feedback and identify what they need. And then based on that feedback, we start creating new content. So in the case of University of Twente, that is mainly done by me based on their feedback, which then goes to our content team internally at Grasple, who give it an internal review to make sure everything is okay, and some suggestions on how we might be able to improve this. And then when that is done, it goes back to the teacher, who then checks if it actually covers the holes in the courses that we had, and whether it meets the requirements of their course. And basically, after this is done, we can then add this new material into the courses. So in the case of U20, basically the process is very simple. We send them our existing materials. The teachers check if this material covers it. They provide what they need. In this case, we are the ones that will be creating extra exercises. Then we review them, and then we add them to their course. And now what I really like about this process is two things. First of all, it's quite interactive. So because we get very specific feedback from the teachers, we can create content that exactly matches their needs and can be used immediately at university level. And the second thing is that it really shows the power of sort of these open education resources. So in the case of University of Twente, we could start by using a lot of the stuff that we had seen and used at TU Delft. But then secondly, we could also create new content based on what University of Twente needs. And I believe we've created over 300 new exercises this past 6 months based on University of Twente's feedback. And then when these are finished, we are currently in the process of getting those into our general community repositories, where they can be used again by TU Delft. So it really sort of shows the power of this open education thing, where you don't get two universities creating entire portfolios of exercises that only they will use with their specific vendor. But now you sort of have this open resource where both University of Twente and TU Delft are only creating material that's new and needed, and not just recreating existing material. So that's very cool, and that's sort of how this practical side works. And then I think Stefan will now probably go into more depth in what U20 is trying to achieve and how they are doing this. So yeah, if you have any questions about this and this process, I'll be in the chat for at least another 15 to 30 minutes. So let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise I'll leave the word to Stefan.
Yeah, Stuurman, thank you very much. My microphone was muted. This was at least sort of the view from our side, but now, of course, it is very interesting to hear how U20 is experiencing that. And for that, we'll give the words to Stefan Postuma from the University of Twente. Stefan, I think you should be able to share your screen, the word is yours. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name is Stefan Postuma. Thanks for the introduction. I graduated in computer sciences, but by now I'm a math teacher at secondary school and also at the University of Twente. And my main job at this moment is that I'm responsible for the content of the Grasple courses that we are using at the University of Twente. And well, in this talk I will discuss the challenges that we encountered just using this content and getting questions about it and how to deal with it. Some backgrounds. We are rather new at Grasple. We just started from this year, so we were very busy before summer to get Grasple up and running. And so most of our efforts were just organizing, support, getting the courses ready, etc. And so I think the most important thing about Grasple is that you have good content and good settings to present this content to the students. And so we are very happy with the contributions of TU Delft, the Prime team, and the Grasple team, because they offered us a great collection of problems, math exercises. And yeah, moreover, we programmed some questions ourselves. For example, students asked, well, do you have questions that represent exam level? And then we said, okay, we will find some sample test questions and we'll implement them. So, well, we just are now working for more than one quartile with this system. We are very content about it, but we encounter now a lot of questions. Well, rather a lot of questions from students, teaching assistants and teachers about this content. Sometimes they say, well, there's a small error in it. Could you extend the feedback? Could you parameterize this question, because then it has more possibilities for the students, etc. Before I tell more about that, well, I think all users of Grasple know that there are other topics to be busy with. And so there are short-term needs, like teachers like to have more possibilities in the monitor and other questions. Well, I focus now on the learning process, but well, in this Corona time, there are a lot of questions about summative testing, doing it remotely, do it safely, etc. And moreover, how do you integrate Grasple in your learning environment? Do you use Canvas? Do you want integration with LTI, etc.? So there are a lot of focus points, and well, I'm happy that we now at University Twente have two other colleagues that are specialized in summative testing, that are specialized in the integration. So we hope to make more steps in the future. Well, for us, it's we have not a very big team that is busy with Grasple. So for us, it's a balance. And at short term, we see that, well, most efforts went in getting the support ready, getting the courses up and running. And well, I can give some examples for it. For example, support. Well, we made a support page with FAQ. And well, you have to update it, and well, it costs time. Also, you have to do research about LTI 1.3. Do you want to use it or not? And what are the user requirements, etc. This takes a lot of time at this moment, and meanwhile, we would like to more focus on the the most important things, also the things that we based our partnership with Grasple on, that is supporting the learning process and do summative testing. And so, for example, for summative testing, can you do it remote and safely? But more interesting for me and for the university, I think, is how can you create really interesting, interactive, and intelligent items that really represent the knowledge and skills of students. Because we have a lot of experience with items that only grade on final answer only. And we got complaints from students that they can't show what they are able to do and what they know. And so, Annie will talk about this later this afternoon. I think this is a very interesting research at our university. I will now focus on the content and the settings itself, and I think we can really improve our content. We have some ideas about it. At first, the content is very important, but also how do you represent the content? And as you all know, I think, as a user of Grasple, if you are in homework modus, there are two modi. There is the fixed order and the adaptive order. And the fixed order shows you all questions in the fixed order, and you all have to do these questions to pass the subject. And in the adaptive order, Grasple just takes questions, and when you have finished 5 questions, then you pass the subject. And we have discussed with the Grasple team, is it possible to make it more adaptive, even more adaptive than it is now? And so we are thinking about, for example, starring, being able to star problems and to make it adaptive to those number of stars, or categorize the questions like University of Delft does, I think. Then you make 3 categories, for example, basic, moderate, challenge, and then students can choose for each subject which level he wants to tackle. You can use performance data of questions, and then on basis of that you can decide the difficulty of the question, and then make decisions on it. There are a lot of possibilities, and we are thinking about how to improve this presentation of the materials to the students. Another thing, and this is really actual, today I got a question from a teacher about a small error in a question. And past week we had an appointment with the Grasple team, and we made some appointments, rules about how to edit and when to edit exercises. And this is rather complicated. From university's perspective, there are a lot of reasons to edit questions. For example, the small errors in it, but also, like Pim Stuman mentioned, sometimes we have UT-specific notation or didactics because of the order of the subjects, etc. Sometimes we think, we would like to extend the feedback because sometimes it's too short, and if students makes an error, then he wants really more feedback on what to do. You can give hints, implement more answer rules, etc. We can improve it maybe by getting really hard questions of exam level. We can create missing items. Now we have some empty subjects still, and we could fill them with new questions. Questions are sometimes really numeric and not parameterized. We could add videos, lessons, etc. And finally, and more sophisticated, we could use conditional logic. So there are a lot of reasons for us to edit the materials. And then, you get the challenge how to do this in an intelligent way. So I think it's important that you have clear rules for editing. And well, now we have two very easy rules. The first is if it's an easy, very short error, simple, small change, just do it yourself and eventually report it to Grasple. Today I had really a small error in integration with a substitution. And well, students are actually training with these questions, and then it should be solved. This problem should be solved as soon as possible. So I did this today. There are also bigger or major changes and errors. And well, if you want to edit those questions, just make a copy of them, edit this copy and report it to Grasple, because they can decide whether this copy is a better version of the original question, and they can upload it in the community repositories. Other ideas that we have is it is also important that the users of Grasple are known what to do with errors or requirements, wishes. I got some questions in my personal mailbox. Some click on report mistake, and well, it's not always clear for users. So we are thinking about making a flow chart with well, these decisions. What should I do if I'm a student and I find an error in an item? What should I do? Well, we are thinking about categorizing all exercises, because there are exercises that are specially for the University of Twente. But there are also community items that are references, and well, we should distinguish between those. And I think it's important for everybody that he knows the status of the materials. There are also a gray zone items that are university specific, but that are maybe possible to transfer to community repositories. So that's another category. And well, for us, it could be interesting to make a database with all items we already have, but to also update it with the status and the history and maybe some metadata about these exercises. Yeah, sharing is caring. For us, it was a quick start, and we only use it now for some months, but we are very enthusiastic about the system. And we know that a lot of people in the Netherlands are busy with Grasple and do interesting things. And I think, yeah, we should invest in cooperation. Yeah, that will help us all to get a better system. And for example, next Wednesday, we have a meeting with somebody of the University of Delft. Gina, she's also in this session, I think. And we will talk about functional management. And I think we can learn and share ideas. So that's very interesting. Well, this is my talk. Are there questions, or do we put it in the chat, or?
Stefan, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and also Stuurman at the beginning. I already saw a lot of comments in the chat regarding checklists, and I think also Tim from the University of Twente already shared their checklist. So this is an interesting, I think, an interesting one to see, and of course also what Marleen is doing on that level to see if sort of maybe there are there sort of shared things where everybody thinks, yeah, okay, this is basic quality. And another thing that I found very interesting to hear, Stefan, and of course I'm aware that this is an important thing, is sort of how to deal with comments or suggestions from either from teachers or students. So maybe that's an interesting thing to put into the chat if there are people from other organizations who have experiences with that as well, and who either think, okay, this is the way we do it, but we're not really happy about it. I'd be very interested in that as well. Or if there are maybe sort of workarounds or sort of flow charts or procedures on how you work with students on your university, on how to actually sort of do students always give comments or suggestions, or how do teachers do this? Because I think if I hear it correctly, Stefan, that would be definitely of interest to you. And of course, I think the long-term solution, I think here would be sort of how can we actually work with versions and get notified if things change, and of course this is also something that we're thinking deeply about at Grasple, and we're working hard to get those updates to you. But I think in the meantime there might already be interesting things happening at other organizations, or at least let's see if that's the case. So if there are things like that, please put it in the chat. If there are questions or comments, also, of course, put them in the chat. I did see a lot of things going on, but no direct questions, I think, yet. So what I think we'll do is for now thank Stefan and Stuurman, and give the word to Annie from the University of Twente, because I think she's been doing really interesting work in sort of extending, or at least exploring possibilities on exercises. So Annie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, my name is Annie, and I'm a master's student of the University of Twente of the Educational Science and Technology master program. I am currently doing my master final project, which is called the Integration of an Online Mathematics Course with Adaptive Items to Support Flexible Learning Pathways in a Bachelor Program. And I'm working with the supervision of Dr. Jander Pen. Before I move on, I explain more about the project, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I have a bachelor in physics, and I have several years as a math and physics teacher, not only in high school, but also like in pathway programs that transition from the high school to university. And I'm, as I said before, I'm currently a master's student of the Educational Science and Technology program of the University of Twente. In my project, I am designing a prototype that combines math education, online education, or blended learning environments, and adaptive learning, or also called conditional logic in the Grasple tool. So I am creating this digital solution for the Build Up Course Mathematics, which is part of the Creative and Technology Bachelor program. And this is an accelerated preparatory course in math for the first year students that aims to give them all the skills and all the math knowledge before they actually take university math courses. So the prototype that I'm designing, it involves conditional logic or adaptive items. And the model that I use in order to develop this prototype is the one that is mentioned in Gordon 2014, which it has an initial question, and regarding the student's performance, the next item, it will be either harder or easier, and so on in the model. So based on this model, I have created this genetic branching tree or decision tree. That it has different levels, and as I call here, the initial level that the student will face is the level N, and according to the student's performance, they will get either an easier item in this case, which I call the item of level N-1, or they will get a harder item, which I call N+1. If the student answers correctly the questions, they will jump to N+1, N+2, and N+3 until I finalize the cycle here. This is you can make it as longer as you want, as the teacher desires. In this case, I decided to do it until N+3, which is the highest level, and N-2, it will be the lowest level. So once the student reach N+3, they will have a message that I will further show you, that it says that they can move to either another subtopic or topic. What is also very interesting about this model is the student will have the possibility to have answer if they answer incorrectly a question 3 times, they will be taken to a video that talks about exactly the competency or the math ability that it was tested in the previous exercise item. So this model has different 15 items. As I say, the highest level, it will be n plus 3. The lowest level will be n. And every time the students will enter to the platform, they will have a question which I call the level n. Each level will have different, it will be testing different math abilities or math competencies. If the student, what is also pretty cool about this model of this branching tree is no matter which one is the path the student is taking, let's say I start with n, then I move to n plus 1, but then I get the answer wrong and I get n plus 1, and I get a wrong. I have one wrong here, one answer wrong here, and if the third time, I will be taken again to a video. So at the end, per branching tree, 6 videos have to be designed, that I also designed in this prototype, that ranges from different levels, from n plus 3 to n minus 2. Due to the curriculum of the course, the Building Up course, this is a preparatory course, so the topics are quite different from university level. So the topic that is being chosen for this prototype are exponents, which I divide in 3 subtopics, which is the first subtopic is the product property for exponents, which is here. The second subtopic is the power property, and the third subtopic is the quotient property. What is interesting about this model is like each item that I have been developed, I have also classified according to the level. So if the student will, all the students will start with this question, the level n, and the ability that is being tested here, of course, is the product property for exponents, where the coefficients are natural, excluding the number 1. The variables are, the bases are variables, and the exponents are also natural, and they have 2 terms. But for example, if the student has to go back to an easier level, the competencies that are tested here is, in this case, we still have 2 terms, but we don't have coefficients in this case. So in that sense, the students are going to have easier questions or harder questions. For example, when the students reach the question or the level n plus 3, and they not only are going to be tested or asked to perform the product property for exponents, but also other competencies like the zero property for exponents and the negative property for exponents and the distributive law. So that's, in that sense, they are also increasing the level per question, per item. So in this specific subtopic, the product property for exponents, this is how the students are going to be moving. So this question that you will see here, I already say that there is the level n. If I answer the question correctly, I will get n plus 1. But if I get it incorrectly, I will be moving back to the question of the level n. But if you can see here, there are 2 different items. They have the same level, but they have different items, and the questions are slightly different. Nevertheless, the topics, the competencies, the math competencies that are being tested are exactly the same. So I also have developed this, as I say before, to the other subtopic for exponents, which is the power property of exponents. And what I did here is, like, in certain way, the product and the power property are connected, because in the level n plus 3, the items are not only testing the power property, but also are testing the product property, as you can see here. Oh, it's not showing here. The product property for exponents. So are kind of like related. And this is the 3 that is being shown for the power property, and the other subtopic that I developed is the quotient. And as here, as I said, it tests the quotient property, the power property, and so it's kind of like interrelated. So the question here is how this is being shown or being seen in the Grasple tool by itself. I want to show you. how this is being. So I create a video.
There's no sound, Annie.
Oh, there's not sound? Let me go back here. I think let me go back to Teams. Thank you, Stefan. Oh yeah. I can do the sound again.
This is the interface the students will see as soon as they enter to the course, and these are the topics.
Is there sound now? Does everybody think?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
That are included in the curriculum. Exponents is the topic that is being developed in this prototype, and initially they will have a theoretical part. After the theoretical part, they will start with the subtopic, which in this case is the product property. So the students are going to see the name of the topic and the level that they are doing it. So here, I'm going to write the answer on purpose, the wrong answer on purpose, and then I will get the feedback. The student have the ability to put, to retry the same answer 3 times. And if the third time the answer is wrong, then the students are going to be moved to a easier level. As you can see here, the is easier because the question has different, is testing different abilities. So now I check and I say, okay, the answer here is a to the 14, the 12th power. And I check and I say, oh, it is correct. And it moves me back to a higher level since I got it correctly. And even though that here, the level here n is exactly the same level here, the item is different. It has the same characteristics, therefore it has the same abilities and skills, but is different. If I got it correctly here, I will check, and it takes me again to a higher level, which is n+1, and so on until I got n+3.
So, oh, sorry. So that is the video that it will show kind of like the interface, but also I also have another video, but I don't, that is show at the end. Like as I say, if you go to the lowest level, I also have another video, but I don't know if we have time to show it. I don't know, Ping, what do you think?
I think it's a short video. We can briefly show it, and then if sort of that's the final video, then yeah, then.
Yeah, it is. It's a video that is 55 seconds.
Perfect.
It's again without sound, Annie.
Okay. So I think I have to go here again. Yeah, my bad. My apologies.
No worries.
I'm sorry, to another power n is multiplying the exponent, so it's going to be a m times n. All right, so that's exactly what I'm going to do in this exercise. We have x to the 52 power elevated to 1/4. So I'm going to keep the same base, which is x, and then multiply 52 times 1/4, and that is equal to x to the 13th power.
So that is the part of the videos. So again, there is a lot of room for further research. For example, further research can focus what is the impact of the conditional logic versus non-conditional affixed order questions that they will have in Grasple, or what is the effect of the videos, or what is the quality of feedback. And yes, that could be for further research in this topic. And this is the reference. And yeah, so if one of you teachers or professors at the university wants to hire me as your PhD student to develop further in this, please let me know. That's it.
Wow, thank you, Ani. I'll just give a hand here. I found it really interesting and cool to see how you use that functionality and all the content that you created. And what I really liked about it was sort of the interactive thing where students could start. You could either, if you already mastered it, you could move up very fast, so it's not frustrating. I think there's some feedback, but maybe you can. I'll briefly mute you. Yeah, perfect. So that's what I found really interesting, and also that you then created the videos, because if you really don't know how to do it, and then just explain to students how to do it. So I would be very interested to hear, of course, how students are experiencing this, and to see if they sort of actually move faster through the material. So very interested to see sort of what comes out of this. But at least for my part, I really want to thank you. And I think there are some questions in the chat. So let's take a few minutes to address that. I think here a question was at the end, the videos. Do you provide a link to it, or do students see it within Grasple? How? Yeah, can you tell a little bit more about that, Ani?
Absolutely. Yes. At the end, the students in the feedback box, the students will have a link that it says if you want to have a detailed explanation, just click on the feedback box at the end of the explanation. So yes, that's how it is included.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Hey, and so what I'm interested in, I can imagine it takes, of course, quite a while to create all of these items. Of course, the advantage is once you've created it, you can keep on reusing it, and it doesn't matter if 2 students or 200 or 2,000 do it. What's the main challenge that you're still sort of running into?
Developing, I think that the biggest challenge is to be very rigorous and strict in the levels of each item. So being very careful that the competencies that you are testing in each level are either increasing or decreasing. Because as a math teacher, as a math background, changing one number for us, it could be very easy. But for the students, for example, in exponents, if the variable doesn't have an exponent, many times the students forget that there is a 1 right there, and that is kind of like an extra competency. So that is very important to be very rigorous in that. That is what I say, more than creating the items, being very careful that the classification per item, it was according to the level. It was either increasing or decreasing.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. I see one more question coming in. So it's, do you know if students get frustrated if they get dropped by making silly computational errors, especially for longer exercises? So if I understand correctly, so students, maybe they understand the concept, but they make an error. Do you know the experience of students, what then happens?
Yeah, unfortunately, this hasn't been tested to the students. I finalized the prototype a couple days ago. So the next stage is tested with some voluntary students. Hopefully, I will get a representative sample. But I will say, since you have the retry question, like the retry part, you have 3 trials to retry, and you also have 3 levels that you go down to get a video. So if you made a computational, like a type of mistake, you can just do retry, put the right answer, and move to a higher level. So that is the way that it could be addressed.
Perfect. I think everybody's is really interested, of course, to hear the experiences from the students later on. So maybe that would be an interesting thing to later on share again. But for now, Ani, I would definitely thank you. Maybe there will be keep some questions coming into the chat. So maybe if you could have a browse through it and see if we can still answer the questions. But for now, let's all thank Ani for her work on this part. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Okay, everyone, let's, I would normally say get a stretch or something, but we're sort of halfway. And I think everybody, I see you all sitting very sort of patiently, focusedly, but do stretch those ligaments a little bit. We're halfway. But we still have a lot of interesting things coming up, so I don't want to stop too long. Because next up we have Iris Monster from Radboud University. And she's been doing a lot of work on sort of using parameterization. So let me briefly share my screen so that we all know who will be talking. Let me see where we are in the program. I think this is what we had. Here we go. Advanced parameterization of statistics exercises. That's also all I will say. So here I'm giving the floor to Iris.
Thank you, Pim. I hope everybody can hear me. I will share my screen and show my slides. Come on. Yeah, okay. So I think everybody should see what I'm seeing, which are my slides. So my name is Iris, and together with 3 colleagues, I develop or alter Grasple material for pedagogical science students. They're in their first year, and they have a statistics course where they learn sort of the basics, the first steps of getting into statistics. So we start off with teaching them about visualization of means, medians, how to compute the standard deviation. Some of our students have barely had any math in their high school, so we sort of have to start from ground zero and work our way towards hypothesis testing. So here I would like to, I was asked to also give a brief presentation about what we're doing, and for this I would like to start off with one of the parametricized exercises that we just created, and this was for a module called hypothesis testing, and this is where we explain students how to do a z-test for one mean. So, for example, happiness of young adults was tested in 2019, pre some sort of pandemic maybe, and their population mean was 80 and population standard deviation was 15. And now a new researcher has gathered a sample of 400 and tested the same happiness scale again. It's just made up numbers. During the pandemic, and has seen a decrease, and now wants to know, okay, has the population mean changed? And what we then teach and ask our students to do is first formulate the null hypotheses and maybe also the alternative hypothesis. It sort of depends a bit on which exercise we're talking about. We would like the students to compute the standard error given the population mean and standard deviation. We would like them to compute the confidence interval. They have to compute the z-score, and then they have to decide if the null hypothesis should be rejected given that z-score. Of course, they can then look up the p-value in a z-table, which they can find in their book. But of course, just based on the z-score, you can also already have a hunch of whether you get a significant p-value or not. So with when we try to parametricize these kinds of exercises, because I cannot look up the p-value given a particular z-score, I sort of make a bit of a workaround, and I do that by first starting off with the z-score that the sample mean will have. So first off, I start off with determining my alpha. So for example, of course, a researcher could decide to use another alpha, for example, 0.1, but in this example, we always use alpha of 0.05, and the critical z-value that belongs to that value is 1.96. Then I make a decision for that particular exercise if I would like the student to reject or keep the null hypothesis by either generating a random z-score between the interval of that critical z-value or outside of it. If I choose a higher number, for example, if I would have chosen a z-score of like 3, then I know that probably the p-value will be significant. So then I generate a random population mean, a random population standard deviation, and a random sample size. Sometimes we try to make life a bit easier for our students, so I start off with a random square root of n, so they have a bit easier numbers to work with in the formulas, and they have a smaller chance of bumping into rounding issues when they continue their steps. I compute the standard error, compute the sample mean using the random generated z-score, and then compute also the bounds of the confidence interval, which we then ask them. So in Grasple, this is then what the parameters look like, and I know that this is recorded. So maybe if you really want to take a better look at it, maybe then just do it afterwards, because I think it's a bit boring if I just go over all of the steps here. And then in Grasple, it will look something like this. So you see that there's this like short story that sort of familiarizes the students with a certain case, and then they see the numbers that are generated, and then we ask them these sort of sub-questions to sort of get to a particular decision. So for our students, sometimes they find it difficult with creating the null hypothesis. They say, okay, mu is equal to the sample mean, which is not the correct null hypothesis. So in our feedback, we also put in that if they use the sample mean, that they will get like conditional feedback saying, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't use the sample mean, you should use the population mean. And what we then also always try to do is when we give the feedback to the correct answer is that we also put in the randomly generated values, so the students can actually see if what they've sort of created in their own clock block, if that also sort of matches with our computation. So maybe they got to the right answer without these values, but then at least it's good for them to sort of see again, okay, these are the formulas that you should have filled in with these numbers, and now you can see how you get to the right answer, just to sort of confirm it again. Something that I also wanted to give a bit of information about is the way that we try to maintain overview, because as I said before, we are working with 4 people on these materials, and the way that we currently maintain our overview is that we first started off with determining which topics we would create in Grasple given the lecture content. So that's basically just per week of lectures we decide, okay, this is the topic. Then divide each topic into separate modules. And then one of us, so not all of us together, will alter or create a particular module in our own repository and notifies the coordinator when he or she is done, who can then check it. And then afterwards, we will move that module to the final version repository and then add it to the course. That is now sort of the way that we keep track of who's doing what and where stuff is. So basically the coordinator knows who's working on what, and then knows when to check something and move it to the permanent place. And the reason that we do this is because this course was given last year as well to another group of students, but we needed to update quite a lot of the Grasple material because last year some of my colleagues started working on it for the first time, so they did create a lot of material in a very short time, but some of the stuff could still be improved. But we did want the students from last year to be able to revisit their Grasple content. So for example, if they are in their second year of statistics course, then they can revisit some of the Grasple materials that we made for them in the way that they were also shown it they took the course. And what we sometimes still find a bit difficult is that we sort of fail a bit to have a large overview or a large sense of overview of the exercises within Grasple. So for example, when you look at the list of exercises, we find it quite difficult to know straight ahead, okay, this belongs to that. And that is something that we're still sort of then outside of Grasple create sort of small overviews for, but maybe someone else has a great tip on that. And then something that we are still sort of thinking about a bit. So as far as I know, we are now one of the few people in our faculty who are working with Grasple. I know that some people from artificial intelligence are also working on it, but for example, the psychology department is not yet. And we would actually, well, I think it would be very good for them to also use Grasple for their statistics courses, but sometimes we find it a bit difficult how we can actually make sure that we can all share material, because how can you make the exercises or the slides fit for a particular study? So for example, we try to include examples that involve the pedagogical sciences. So there's a lot of stuff around kids, of course, in our examples, but maybe that is not super interesting for psychology students. How can you maintain overview across teams? So right now we're just with the 4 of us and everything is very small and nice and manageable. But what do you do when you work on it with like 7 different teams? And how can you also make the material compatible to someone else's course? So for example, we have a particular flow of which lecture is about what if you actually, for example, we explain quite a bit about computing the mean and the median and how that all relates to each other, but maybe another course doesn't do that. And then how can you then easily share the material? And that was sort of the end of my talk. So Pim, would you like me to stop sharing my screen, or do you think it would be good to keep these questions up?
Yeah, maybe it's great to keep these questions up, because I can definitely imagine that there are also other people at different organizations who face these same challenges. But I'm also very interested to hear if there are other people who maybe found a way to work around that. So, but let me first start by saying, Iris, that thank you very much for showing your work. And I think it's really interesting in how you took, I think, a pretty sort of a broader skill that students need to master, and actually sort of really subdivided that into questions, give feedback in that, and how you use parameterization in that. So I don't know, I really like seeing it. Let's see if there are other questions from the audience. And one thing that I wanted to ask is, have you already tested this with students? So have students already used these exercises?
Yeah, a lot.
And what are their reactions?
Sometimes they don't really notice that it's parametricized. Sometimes they do. So we have told them that if they want, that they can do the exercises again and again and again if they find something a bit more difficult. And we do notice that there really are quite a few students who already have made all of the material that we created in Grasple. And I can imagine that maybe prior to the exam that they will maybe want to revisit some of the exercises to just make sure that that they still know what to do. But I think that the students really like it, that they can work in their own pace and practice. So the students really like it, but we still have to do a larger evaluation of Grasple with the students. We want to do that at the end of the course.
Okay, yeah, no, great. And one maybe follow-up question. So I think the idea, of course, is that first of all, students can practice a lot and sort of get these basic, sort of the basic skills under their belt, I think. Is that how you would call it? What I'd be interested in, do you also see an effect in the type of questions that students ask? So one thing that at least I observed in my class, I also taught a statistics class, is when students could practice more online, sort of the questions would become more interesting because they sort of had these basic questions out of the way. But then, of course, they ask more about the concepts and the things. Are you also seeing that, or is that something that you're not seeing? So yeah, I'd be very interested.
Well, it's something that we sort of force a bit on them, perhaps. So before that we started using Grasple, we had exercises that they would do sort of on paper, and that those exercises would then be discussed in a question hour type of responsiecollege. And right now we moved all of the more basic stuff to Grasple. And then the stuff that is still on paper and that's also discussed during that question hour is more of the advanced stuff. So also where we combine different topics together, or where we really dive into, okay, so how would you now interpret this, or what is wrong with this? So I do think that it helps that students can then practice on their own, as you said, with the more easier stuff, just getting the formulas down, and then then when they're ready for it, they can do the more advanced stuff, and then they will also be able to discuss that with the teachers more. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, great. So one of the questions that I think you asked to the audience, where normally you can then of course point to people, but I will sort of try to do that now, because I think people from TU Delft also have at least experiences with creating material that is then used in different types of courses, different types of contexts. So maybe first question is at least that's my assumption or my view. So let's maybe see if that is correct. And if that is correct, I'd be also very interested to hear sort of how TU Delft is approaching that. So maybe somebody from TU Delft, for example, Ilse or somebody else, could you maybe go into your experiences at the TU Delft on this particular point where you have sort of generic exercises or exercise that is used for a different course, and then how is it being used in different ones? I'm not sure if if somebody could answer that maybe in the chat, and then I can give you the word. But what I already see is Kirsten from Utrecht, who is saying we also use lessons for different courses. So maybe Kirsten, could you elaborate on that a little bit? And do people then also change those lessons, or do you use sort of the same lesson in different courses?
Hi, everybody. We try to use lessons as is for different courses. So if we discover, like, if there's a lesson that kind of discusses two topics, but other courses only discuss the first topic, we try to split lessons into two so that the original class can use both lessons and all the other classes can use only the first part. Because I know if you copy lessons and also all the exercises that come along with it, the Grasple gets a huge storage problem, I think. If we all duplicate all the exercises only to change the word to the, then sometimes you just need to settle for what's there and be happy with lessons that have been developed, and maybe they use a different example than you're used to, but it really covers the same topic. So we've kind of tried to make lessons that are usable for a whole bunch of classes. Now, we are one methods and statistics department that teach classes for all different social sciences. So we don't just develop material for pedagogy, but also for other types of classes. And so we try to integrate examples about a whole bunch of different topics. So we don't run into a topical problem or a problem about topics. So we don't have that, but we try to use to reuse as many lessons as possible. We try to not copy things. So don't put in your on your front page, welcome to whatever class you are teaching, because then others can't use the lesson. So that's how we try to go around that.
Okay, perfect. Kirsten, thank you very much for sharing that. So I summarize it. I think one of the things you're trying to do is keep it very modular. So if there are things that sort of, if it addresses two topics, either split it if it's possible. And then the second thing that I heard you say is we try to use a lot of different examples where they don't fit perfectly then, but it's sort of good enough so that everybody has a different sort of have a different context with each question. What you also mentioned, and I understand that you're not doing that too much, but it is a possibility, Iris, is that indeed you create sort of a generic or just a question with one type of context, and then the other person can copy it and just only change the context, and then sort of have more, have it sort of then students can maybe relate to it more. But that does indeed sort of bring its own challenges, where if an update happens, of course, to the original material, then you don't get that in the new update. So in the new version. So that I do think is a challenge. And what I see here in the chat happening is at Delft, what people try to do is make a lot of more generic or sort of questions that can be used in different kind of courses, and then have some of these questions where you actually adapt the context, so that you don't have copies of everything, but really copies of exercises or of lessons where the context really sort of helps or really matters, and then only do it there. I do see or feel that, of course, this does bring another challenge of overview, which we already heard before. We also heard Stefan mention it, of course. So I think that is definitely something that we've also from Grasple can maybe, should really try to explore how we could maybe help you, help all of you better in supporting that and in sort of getting that overview. So also after this event, we'll be very interested to hear your feedback on those points, like what are you really running into? So where is the overview missing? What kind of overview would you like to get? Because we will, of course, that's at least that's how we see our job, is to help you then get that overview. Iris does it, at least I don't think it addresses it perfectly, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of a view on how other people are tackling that issue that I think they're experiencing as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. Iris, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Maybe one question. So I already heard you would share it with other instructors from your faculty. Are you also planning to share it under an open license so that people from other universities could also use it?
So I think Ellen has sometimes approached us to share some of our material with some other universities or colleges. I think that if somebody is interested in our material, then our coordinator is more than willing to see if that's possible. I do think that the way that our material is organized right now it's really tailored to the way that our statistics course is given, and that's also why, at least we find it a bit difficult. Okay, how can you really make sure that it's all transferable and that the pet peeves of some of the instructors are maybe less strict or something. Yeah, so we can all share. Yeah.
Where are those difficulties that exactly, Iris, in the transferring the material?
Well, that people have taught these statistics courses for years and years and years, and they have really come up with their own way of how they want it to be taught, and then I think something new is always scary, and I don't know, they would really prefer it to be something that and then they only see bears instead of just the way that it could be. Yeah.
So it has maybe also to do with the order of the questions, or in what level is it not transferable then?
Well, I think that, for example, the way that our statistics courses are organized does not fit with, for example, psychology. So I think that psychology and pedagogical sciences are two studies that are like most similar, but even there's like a huge distinction between the topics that are discussed by us and also by what the psychology department does. So then you would have to pick which modules you want to copy. And I think then when people think, okay, I have to do something for it, then I want it to be completely perfect. And they think, well, we've always worked the way that we did. And so I think that, well, I do really like it that in my colleagues are very like open for changes and improvements, and they really see the value of this online material. But some other people see that less. Or for example, when you look at the AI department, they teach statistics in R, which already is a huge change. We do it with SPSS, and they don't go into explaining how you compute a standard deviation. They assume that the students just know it. But for us, it's like a whole topic. Yeah.
Well, what we try, maybe that's something to say, is we work mainly with exercises, so not with complete lessons, but just exercises, and we order them on topics, and then every course can select the questions that he wants to and puts it in the order that he wants to, and then so the responsible lecturer has the freedom to select the exercises that fits his course. And as from the developer side, you have the freedom to create the questions which go with the topic, and maybe ask all the lecturers what kind of questions do you want for this topic, and then we create them, so that in this way you have a sort of topic organized database where everybody draws the questions from which fits the course.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So I think this modular approach, I think that's sort of at least that makes sharing a lot easier. But of course, even there, sometimes you do run into the constraints. And I think it's really interesting to see where those sort of the boundaries, at least for now, are. And then maybe we can see some of those we can maybe help to make easier. Other ones maybe just sometimes it's hard to make easier, and that's just the way it is. But it's probably already very helpful to at least sometimes use some questions, and not have 100% then of the lecture of the exercise online, but at least part. And I think that's also what you're doing. So I really want to thank you, Iris, for sharing the things that you've created, for showing you how you use that, but also for explaining sort of very clearly the things you're still running into, and that you that would be sort of the next steps, and that well, maybe we also could help to provide some more overview or help actually sort of the sharing and this context. So thank you very much, Iris. Applause works also a little bit strange here, right? So maybe we can, exactly, do like hands, or probably in a few years we're sort of very used to how this works. But for now, Edith, thank you very much. And I think I'll quickly use this to go into the next topic, and that is less on sharing materials and more on summative assessment. And let me see if I can share my screen here. I have to go a little bit fast. So summative assessment. What I'll do is just give a very brief overview of at least sort of the topics, the words that we'll use. So I think most of you know this, at least the definition that we'll use here. So formative assessment is for learning. It's for the student themselves to see where they stand, and summative is also for a grade or a certification. And especially, of course, with COVID, suddenly everybody had to change how they do their assessments. And what we see is that some universities sort of just are more on the trust side, so they trust students more and just say sort of don't don't do bad things. While others are more on the control side. This also often, I think, depends on the level of the students. So what we often see is, with more the master students, it's more like, okay, you're really doing this for yourself. And with the first year students, it's probably you're also doing this for yourself, but maybe let's make it a little bit harder for you to sort of to cheat and to sort of to do things that you may in the end regret. But often more control also has its disadvantages. It can be very staff intensive. You can do video lectures, and you have a lot of sort of video assessments. You have a lot of control, but it's also very intensive. So I think you really want to have this balance between control or trust. I think that's a choice, but then make it as scalable as possible. And one of the things that at least sort of we as Grasple think is interesting in that way is if you do a lot of parameterization and pooling, so make sort of generate exercises, generate exams that are different for every student. You make it very hard, at least, to communicate with others because everybody has different questions, everybody has different values. So I think then finally the sort of the easier thing becomes sort of just doing the work and actually seeing if you can do it for yourself. And I think for me personally, I don't think this should be very much tailored to then give people grades or sort of use this extrinsic motivation. But I think it is very important to help people actually get a feel for if they master the fundamentals, because of, as many of you know, in math and statistics, if you master the fundamentals, it's easy to move on. But if you don't, it's really hard to build on top of a broken foundation. And so different ways of randomization that can be used, I think at least these are the ways that we call it. So shuffling, where you do questions in different order. Parameterization, where you do different values. And of course, this is also what we saw Iris present. And then you also have pooling, where you say, I want a question on this topic, but there can be different questions that are then in that pool of questions. And then one is drawn from it. So student A gets question 1 and student B goes to question 2. And then it becomes really hard, even if you have WhatsApp or something else open, to sort of even find out what the other questions the other people are working on. And then in a sort of a still high stress environment, at least I think this is the hope, that most students will then think, let's just do this because we're doing this for ourselves. The TU Delft has a lot of experiences by now doing these remote math assessments because I think in the past summer they have done over 10,000 and more will come. So we thought it would be interesting to sort of hear their experience on the things that went well there, but also maybe the things they're still running into, and let's see if maybe people from other universities have different solutions for those challenges, or at least share the same experiences. So with that, I would like to give the word to Ilse Bakker from TU Delft, and to hear her experiences from remote summative assessment at TU Delft.
Thank you, Pim. That was actually a really good introduction to our story, so that's nice. I will do the first bit of our talk, but actually Iris, who's a teacher at the TU Delft and does a lot of high quality development of questions, will take over the talk and tell you a bit more about developing the exam databases that we're doing right now. So I think in May there was the last teacher day from Grasple, and then there was of course the beginning of Grasple, and we had the big challenge of all the students needed also the summative testing without being able to be on campus. So online exams were a solution at least. And I think we are at the TU Delft then more at the control side. So we really wanted the online proctoring. And Grasple made it available for us, so that we could test with Grasple questions and have this proctored with a software called RP Now. So the bit of the talk, I wanted to keep it really practical. I just wanted to show you actually how do we set up the exams and how do we make a connection with the online proctoring. I thought maybe it would be nice to just literally see this. And then afterwards, because that's just so that this was also what Pim is mentioning, is it is quite time intensive to also do exams in this way, because you have to really set up the exams, and to this proctoring also gives in the end, of course, a lot of material that needs to be watched to see if there's fraud indeed. So it is quite time intense. So that's why Prime, the sort of organization at the TU Delft behind the material, was doing this. And then the other part of the online exams, what was intense was to make good questions. So that's what Iris will tell you more about. Okay, I have a really easy PowerPoint presentation to show you some of the things. Okay, here we go. And I cannot look. Okay. So developing the questions. So that's what Iris will tell you more about. So to set up a exam with RP Now, it actually what we do is we made batches. Why is this? This is because we didn't want to have too much students in one batch, because then we also couldn't help them with the live support. So in the setup, there's a lot of questions coming from students. Yeah, when something went wrong, so is going wrong. So that's why we divide them into batches of 150 students. So the first step actually was making batches, and then we made exam repositories in Grasple with those batches, and we put tests in this. Well, in this test, of course, there needed to be questions, and then the lecturers of these exams, they selected questions, put them in the subject, and later on they draw them in the exams. And we actually used all the randomization options that Pim just mentioned. So we used the question pools, we parameterized the questions, and yeah. So now the exam was set up. And actually then the second step was putting the exam settings in a right way. So here we have the, of course, just the timing settings, but this was actually the magic then for now. So we enabled the proctoring, and we had a password which was created then by RP Now. So we plugged it in the Grasple exam settings. And because it was in these settings, it was actually quite easy for the students when they did the RP Now intake to insert this password into their exam, because it was automatically linked. They just had to press a green button, and then they were all ready to start with their exam. Okay, so we have the exam, we have questions in the exam, we have the settings right. Then what we had to do was we created courses for the exams, and actually for every batch there is then a Grasple course. And what we put in there is then, well, of course, the exam that you just saw, but we also had a Grasple Check Your RP Now setup test exam, which was for the students to sort of get the to practice with Grasple, but also with the RP Now settings. So this they could do beforehand, typically a week before their exam. So when this course is created, then all the students get invited, just like a normal course invite, by email. And by accepting then this email, they could enter the course 15 minutes before the exam. Sorry, they could start the intake process, and then just at the time the exam starts, the question appears. This was then about setting up from our side the exam, but also from the student side there needed to be some preparation done. They needed to install RPNow. They needed to practice with this intake procedure, and to be honest, some of the students do find this quite stressful, because you can see this is the manual. It contains of 13 pages. So I think the most interesting part is in the first 4 or 5 pages, but still it does need some preparation. And yeah, what we typically see is that the students who do prepare, we can see if they made this Grasple test your RPNow setting tests, they don't tend to use the live support as much as the ones who don't prepare, which is of course something you can predict. Yeah, so in our process then, during the exam, there was live support from Grasple and from the TU Delft. So if there were issues really concerning Grasple, then there was always a direct answer. And for the more technical intake procedure questions, the TU Delft live support was answering the questions. And then, of course, after the exam, then we wanted to show the students their final answers, or their answers and their feedback. But we could just do that after all the batches have finished. And then we also had to review the RPNow recordings, or at least the ones who were flagged, see if there was fraud, and then we could finalize the exams. So I think this is yeah, sort of overview of the exam process, but not of the development of the questions. So I would like to ask Iris to tell us more about this.
Hi everyone, I'll see if I can also manage the screen share. I very quickly created a rough presentation.
No.
Oh no.
You can't do it.
It doesn't want to do the screen share. Okay, then I'll
desktop.
I'll do a desktop screen share. Okay, that should be it. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we created these Grasple exam questions. And of course, especially when COVID had just gotten loose in the Netherlands, it was pretty much chaotic, but by now we have a pretty thorough system set up. So first of all, we need to know what questions are necessary, and we come up with those based on old exams, based on the fact that you've taught a course like that, but also we're asking everyone responsible for a course that needs those questions, hey, what are you still missing? What do you want? What do you need? And we try to create questions like that. So how do we set it up? Well, first of all, we created 3 repositories. We don't actually use all of them anymore, but it was our first idea to sort of structure this. So we created a repository for, okay, we're developing here, and then another repository to move them to when the questions are checked by first a teacher and then a student assistant. And finally, we move them to a final repository where we say, okay, they're now ready to use, and all teachers get access to that repository to basically select their exam questions, and they can be confident that they have at least been double and triple checked. Although eventually we discovered that overview is definitely an issue, so we created this huge workflow sheet, which basically contains a lot of comments on every single question created, like who made it, what's the Grasple ID, here's a direct link, which is why we never needed the check repository anymore, because every checker would just link from the sheet and get immediately linked to the question. Is it actually a copy and a slight deviation from another question? Because you can then easily check for similar issues. What's it about? What does it do? Are there partial credits? Are there any remarks to the teacher? Are there any remarks to the creator, him or herself? For example, yes, well, I parameterized it this way because if I did it the other way, I ran into this and this issue. So if I try to modify this later, I need to remember that. So that's also part of the sheet. And then, of course, commentaries by the people who check these questions, replies until finally the question is accepted and put into the yes, you can use this now repository. And finally, we have heavily tried to work with partial credits because using all these rule IDs for feedback that Grasple created, you can actually get a Grasple export that contains the rule IDs triggered for every student. And you can use that to say, well, if this rule ID is triggered, let's award some partial credit here and there. And then some people started programming, Dennis and Bart in our case, and created this export sheet where basically for every question used in your exam, you get a line in the sheet telling you what question pool it was in, and if there was a parent question, the max point, and you can basically fill out how many points do I want to award for this question. And if any rule IDs also trigger a correct answer, they automatically get max filled out in that sheet. So you don't need to say that's also 9. And for all other rule IDs, you can actually enter, okay, so many partial credits for this one, so many partial credits for that one, so many partial credits for that one, and so on, and so on, and so on. So this was a nice bit of programming, I think, to quite conveniently create a large structure with partial credits for all sort of different questions without having to do it all manually. And this could then be fed into another script, which would then spit out an entire list of how every student did in every question pool, which question they got, how many points they got, and whatever else we needed. So this is our general setup. And then I'll move on to basically a lot of discussion in creating the questions. So for this part of this mini presentation, I just wanted to ask all of you if you have any input. So this is my list of points of discussion where we as a team of teachers creating questions definitely do not all agree with one another. And I rather like having that discussion because it also opens actually a more fundamental discussion on what do we really want in an exam question anyway. So this is a lot of points where I feel, well, some of us say this and some of us say that, and there's a couple of pros and cons everywhere, of course. So first of all, how do you organize a subject? I mean, you want teachers to be able to select questions from this repository and to set up their exam that way. And that means you organize all the questions into subjects. And well, you can either make teeny tiny subjects, such as on the right-hand side of this slide, where you see that paragraph 9.3 from Stuart actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different subjects, all with their teeny tiny things, and some of them actually only contain one question. Is that convenient? I don't know. I mean, definitely before we organized these things by Stuart paragraphs, it was pretty much a disaster because no one could find anything. So, well, that is a little bit of a point on the overview business. On the other hand, if you figure, let me just add all these questions on first order differential equations together, or in the case on the left-hand side, we have questions regarding convergent or divergent series, all tests together, it becomes quite hard to set up your test because you really need to dive into that subject and figure out, okay, so there's 20 questions here. Are they really on comparable level? Which ones do I want anyway? And if I did not teach the, I don't know, the comparison test, which questions can I then use or not use? Titles are rather crucial, but as soon as you copy any exercise, your title will be lost, which is a bit of a downside, I suppose. So this is one of the things I think right now we are still trying to balance between small and large. And well, this is both from our actual exam repository for analysis questions. So clearly we use both small and large subjects right now. And another big discussion point is, do you want to create your variations outside a question? So do you want to create a lot of similar questions to then be put into a subject and say, hey, this would be a good question pool? Or would you prefer to create variation inside a single question? And how do we do that variation inside a question? Well, first of all, of course, you parameterize, but within that parameterization, you can then make nice use of lists where, for example, I have this differential equation on the right-hand side containing some function p and some function q, where q is eventually constructed by first choosing what integrating factor I want to use anyway. But then I have some choice to make for what p I want and what integrating factor I want. And by putting those in lists and then choosing a random selection, I can actually set up a lot of different questions all inside one question. Personally, I rather like it, but it also admittedly has quite some downsides. So the first pool, I have to admit both of these were created by me, so I'm clearly on the fence on this issue. On the left-hand side, creating many, very, very similar questions. Well, it's quite easy to analyze student results because you can see exactly who got what question. And on the other hand, it's a disaster if someone tells you, yes, well, in your solution to this question, please change sentence 2 by these 3 words, because that solution actually occurred in all 12 feedbacks, or 8 feedbacks of this question in all 12 questions. So then you have to do that 96 times, which, well, gets rather time consuming. On the other hand, if you create all the variation inside the question, well, the edits are quick. Creating it is going to take quite a bit of time because this parameter list will go on for a while. Once you're done, you have a great many questions inside a single question because, as you see, even in those lists, there are a couple of parameters. So you get a lot of questions once you actually made it work. However, if you want to program the answer, you're going to need even more parameters to actually be able to display all the in-between steps of the answer. And it gets rather hard to check, because if someone needs to check this exercise to see if it actually does what it needs to do, you need to carefully make sure that you check all the different variations that this question is going to come up with. So that does become harder. So upsides, downsides, I think it's good to be aware of them at least. And for myself, it's always a choice to make, right? What do I want to do here? Then another issue with discussion for us. Do we want to create many short questions? On the left-hand side, here's a differential equation. Here's the solution. Now solve an initial value problem. This one is really rather easy, but it definitely tests only one skill, right? There is not much to it. On the other hand, since Grasple did create all these rule IDs, we can actually create harder questions and give very extensive feedback and partial credits, etc. So currently on the right-hand side, you once more have a differential equation. Now we're asking for a general solution. And by computing with the student answer, you can actually extract what their solution to the homogeneous equation was, how they computed with it. If they got this solution for the homogeneous equation, what do we think they got for their integrating factor? And is the rest of their answer consistent if they kept working with that incorrect integrating factor? You can do a lot of those computations, which is quite fun. On the other hand, once again, it's not always feasible to do this. It's a lot of work, and there are some timeout issues, especially once you think I have these 20, 30, or 50 different rule IDs. Sometimes Grasple is not so happy with what we create. But on the other hand, you can actually grade some convenient questions, almost like you would grade an open question, if you are able to extract the student answer and pull it apart properly. And I really like that you can differentiate a student answer with respect to C to figure out what they actually have there. And then differentiate to C again to see if it's actually linear in C or if they did something weird there. So we do have a lot of possibilities there. Then again, do we even want partial credit? As a team of teachers, we don't seem to agree. However, currently, we create the questions to enable this partial credit and then tell the responsible lecturer, okay, if you use this question, it's up to you to choose what partial credit you give, for what, and to what extent. So we basically create them to give the options, and then the lecturer choosing the exam exercises can still make all the choices that he or she might want to make. And finally, one more choice that we end up with is how do students actually input their answers? Because on the one hand, Grasple has this great idea with sub-questions, and I really like what Annie was talking about earlier, that you can actually create a chain of sub-questions and use conditional logic and everything. But currently, conditional logic is not available for an exam question. And also, if you create separate sub-questions and you need the answer to the first question to continue with the next question, you cannot actually grade that fairly, because making an error in question A might cause a wrong answer to question B, and we cannot check them simultaneously. So you can do a workaround and say, well, actually, I'm asking both of my questions at the same time. and I am asking for 2 comma-separated inputs, because that way I can compute with both answers at the same time and can check if they make one error consistently. So these are, of course, 2 completely different questions, but that's because I just picked some random exam questions where I saw this happening. So on the left-hand side, I really like the clear formatting. There are not many issues with students messing up their input. But to me, it really only works if the questions do not need each other. If you can make question 2 without making question 1 anyway. Comma-separated answers, I really like that you can compute with both answers at once. However, input is going to be an issue. You need to be very clear on what you expect student to give. But if they make one error in the first thing, you can just keep computing with it and see exactly what they're doing. So I think here we have a bit less discussion, but I think if we're talking exam questions, this is one of the things that comes up. And finally, we had a serious time constraint. So on the one hand, you want a lot of questions, and on the other hand, you would really like to give very thorough feedback. What is the correct solution with all the in-between steps? What did the student do wrong? Can we explain that carefully? Can we do some computations with the student answer to show how the student could have seen his or her own error? Well, at some point, you've got to make a choice if time is limited. And right now, our choice is all over the place. Sometimes we do this and sometimes we do that. So yeah, it's not perfect. Let's just keep it at that. But those are some of the issues we have encountered in creating all of those exercises. So if you have any further advice on this or any further discussion on this, I'm absolutely interested.
Perfect. Iris, again, applause indeed for Iris and Ilse. Ilse for showing sort of the practical side of how to organize these exams, and Iris for, I think, sort of putting out there these dilemmas. I think you also mentioned limitation of time. I do think we're also running into that right now, because I think we'll definitely try to stop at 5. But I think the dilemmas sort of that you put out there are very interesting. And I'm not sure they're sort of best answers. So there's probably a sort of, if we do this, it has this advantage. If we do that, it has advantage. But maybe that is sort of almost how research works. Like we started this, but now we have many new questions. And it would be really interesting to see how other people at ART or other organizations think about it. So if you do still have a little bit of time, it would be really interesting to see. So how do you think about this, and put it into the chat. Maybe we can use that as a at least sort of as a way to work sort of to build the discussion for next time, because I do think it's really interesting points. Also, do you do the parameterization inside a question? Do you create many ones? I'm thinking about this coding principle of don't repeat yourself. I think that's one of the things sort of that you're trying to do. But on the other hand, if you do it, you're losing out on sort of can you still check it and can you still analyze it properly? Now, one thing that I would be just as a question that I saw in the chat, so we'll do one, which was, would hierarchy be helpful? So more hierarchy. Just yes. I see a big yes. Okay, so that's interesting to know. I think given time, we'll have to keep it at that, Iris. But I do hope that people will put it into the chat. And otherwise, I think these would be really interesting things for next time. Like, how actually do you organize those materials? And how do you then address these challenges? So to round it off, what I would like to do very quickly is do a sort of, is first of all, thank again to all of the speakers, and really give a big hand, because I was really impressed by all the work that you did, and found it really interesting to see all the experiences that you shared, and also the challenge that you ran into. So thank you very much for that. And what I'll do is, as a sort of a last thing, is to give you a sort of a update tornado. Only a brief selection of of the things we did since the last teacher day. It will only be a small selection, and I will sort of breeze through it. But in the summer, we've been working on LTI 1.3, which is safer, future-proof, and it helps with integrating it better into your learning management system. Also, gradebook integration. So do know that it's possible right now. Depends on your organization if it is available. But if you want this, definitely ask them. There are new parameter operators that have been released, and I think also Iris from Radboud have been using this. So you can now use these parameters also in parameterizing your exercises. We've done a lot of small quality of life improvements, like copying slides to a specific position, so you don't have to drag them all around inside the theory lessons. You can now display points per question. Not with rule IDs, I think, yet, but you can do it just with general questions. So this is just briefly to show what it's now possible. So in an assessment, you can say, I want to show students how many points per question there are. Then in the assessment, you can say, I want to make available 4 points, for example, for this assessment. And then you can also do this for pools, for question pools. And then within the question, you can set weights. So every sub-question can have a weight. And that's all the weights are added and then divided. So you get, for example, if the question in total is worth 4 points, and there are 10 weights to distribute around the question, then it is finally worth 1.6 points. So then you can actually use, at least in sub-questions, you can use grading and then show that to students. You can completely control it. And what we're working on now is make sure that if you keep on doing this for a lot of students, because you are using it for many more and more students, so that the reliability remains high, that you can send notifications if something happens during the assessment. And we're working hard on an exercise metrics dashboard so that we can actually see how students are using your material. Now, with that, I really want to thank you for sharing this, because I think that together we can make education more open, more personal, and it's really you who are doing this. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. It will be released online, in video, in a blog, and I'd be very interesting to hear all of your experiences next time. For now, let's give a big applause to all of you. Put in your camera if you want and just sort of wave so that we have some way of sort of saying bye to everyone. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Yeah, I would just say see you next time. All right, Ellen, thank you so much. I will close this recording right now.